Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about books that have the only one bed trope, which I feel like is a fan favorite. This is where there is a situation in the book that basically the two main characters, who usually aren't in a relationshipy place, are kind of forced to share a bed. Either they get to a hotel and there's only one room left with one bed, or they're at a family member's house or something, there's only one bed. Basically, just somehow they end up in a situation where there is only one bed and the two of them need a place to sleep. And so let's just get right into the recs. So the first book is People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. This is obviously a very popular book. This is sort of a best friends to enemies to lovers kind of story. These two characters go on vacation with each other every year from the time they're in college, and then they eventually get to this point where they have a falling out and they stop going on this trip together. But this girl has decided that they're gonna go again this year, and she lets him know, and he's like, okay, fine, and they end up going on another trip. But when you're reading this, you're alternating between present and past, so every time you read a past chapter, you're reading one of their trips that they went on in previous years. So every chapter moves up a year. You start with 11 years ago, and then you read a present chapter, and then you go 10 years ago, then a present chapter 9 years ago. So you're slowly working your way towards the present through their past while also watching them in the present, which is really interesting. And it's obviously got a ton of travel related content in it, which is also nice. And this one has a only one bed scene in it, obviously, or it wouldn't be in this video. I personally really enjoyed this one. This is my favorite Emily Henry book, so I always recommend this one. Next book is Make It Sweet by Kristen Callihan. This one is sort of interesting. It follows a girl who is an actress who's on sort of the book equivalent of Game of Thrones, but she ends up getting axed from the show, and she's super depressed about it. So one of her, I think it's her family members or her friend or someone, tells her she should go to this vacation house that she knows the owner of, and she's like, yeah, okay, fine, I guess I'll go there. No one will be around, it'll be in the woods, whatever, I'll go there while the episode is airing that I'm killed off, so that I can just stay away from the press and everything. So she goes up there, but the owner of this place's grandson ends up showing up, and he is an ex-hockey player, and he is there as well, and they are obviously the only ones there that are the same age, and so they sort of start seeing a lot of each other. And this one also obviously has an only one bed moment in it. I really enjoyed this one more than I thought I would. This is not one of my favorite authors of all time, but definitely one that I sort of have hit or miss books with, so I was definitely surprised when I enjoyed this one as much as I did. Next is Goal Lines and First Times by Finley and Saxon. This is an hockey romance. It is the third book in the CU hockey series, but they're all standalone, so they can be read on their own. The entire series is hockey romances, and in this one in particular, these two guys join this dating app, and they end up talking, but they know each other in real life, but they don't realize that that's who they're talking to on the dating app. And one of them kind of has all these issues with hockey players because his twin brother is a hockey player, and he sort of feels like all of these guys have sort of wanted to be around him to get to his brother, and so he's worried about this guy being a hockey player finding out that his brother is also a really famous hockey player, and so he is kind of worried about that, so he doesn't want to tell this guy who he is and things like that. And this one does have an only one bed scene. Obviously, like I said, it's in this video, so of course it does. Like I said, you could totally read this book without the rest of the series, but the rest of the series is good. I will say they're all sort of the same. They all, except for one of them, which might actually be this one, they're all nerd gets with a jock. That's the trope in every one of these books, so that was a little repetitive, but they are all pretty good on their own. Next is Under Locke by Mariana Zapata. This is a brother's best friend romance where the girl ends up getting a job at her brother's best friend's tattoo shop as the receptionist. And so she's just doing that, she's working, and this best friend doesn't really want this girl there. Not that he's not gonna give her the job, but he's just kind of annoyed by her and doesn't really talk to her much, and she's kind of getting offended by it. But this one, of course, obviously has an only one bed moment in it. Like Mariana Zapata, it is a slow burn. It's not as slow as most of her books are, though, I will say. I think this is one of her earlier books. It's got more of a quicker slow burn, if that makes any sense. But I did still enjoy this one. Next is Addicted to You by Krista and Becca Ritchie. This is obviously the first book in the Addicted and Calloway Sisters series, but I really believe that you could just read this book probably on its own and be fine. And honestly, I'd probably recommend it that way. And this one follows, obviously, Lily and Lo. I feel like everyone's heard about this. Lily is a sex addict and Lo is an alcoholic, and they just sort of use each other to cover their addictions. There's fake dating in this one. There's best friends to lovers. It's got a lot of good tropes in this, but it does have like a really good only one bed scene as well. And so this one is another one that I think definitely falls into this category. Next is Something Wilder by Christina Lauren, which is sort of a different book. I feel like this is like a very like adventure driven book. This girl works at this sort of like tourist attraction thing that she's created, where she takes these people on these like treasure hunt tours, and her dad was like big into treasure hunting, but she kind of resents him for it because he was never around when she was a kid. And so she is now running this like what she thinks is like a really tacky like treasure hunt with these like tourists that come in. And years before, she was seeing this guy, and he just one day left to go home because there was like an accident or something with his family, and he just never came back. And he ends up showing up with all of his friends at this tour, and he doesn't know that's where he's going because every year his friend group picks a destination to go on vacation, and only one of the guys knows where they're going. Like, one guy plans it all and doesn't tell the other guys where they're going or what they're doing until they get there. And so he had no idea that he was going to end up on this tour where this girl was going to be running it, or that she was even running it, because when they knew each other, she wasn't. And so they end up kind of being back together, so it's like a second chance romance, but it also has a only one bed situation. And I really enjoyed this one. I think even the parts of this book that are not focused on the romance were super interesting and exciting. So I definitely liked this one, especially if you like more like outdoorsy type romances. This one is definitely a good one for that. Next is Everything for You by Chloe Liese. This is my favorite book in the Bergman Brothers series. This is the most recent release. It is another MM book. It follows two guys who are on a soccer team together and sort of hate each other, but one of them is like, it's definitely like grumpy sunshine. One of them is like super upbeat and like peppy and just like loves being like the happy-go-lucky kind of dude, and then the other guy is like super grumpy because he's older and he's got all this pain from all his like years of playing soccer, and he's just like super grumpy all the time. But the upbeat like sunshiny one always looked up to this other guy as a kid, like he was like his soccer idol, and so now they're playing on the same team and they end up not really meshing together, and they end up having to be co-captains together. So they're obviously seeing a lot more of each other, and they are also neighbors. And so this one just like had like all the good tropes. I like really loved this book, honestly. Like, if you're gonna read any one of the Bergman Brothers books, read this one. It was so good, and obviously has the only one bed trope as well, which is a really good one. So definitely recommend this one. Next is Twisted Hate by Anna Huang. This is not one of my favorite all-time series, but this book does have this trope in it. And this one follows Jules and Josh, who you see them in the first two books. This is the third book in the series. You see them in the first two books sort of picking on each other and constantly just like bantering back and forth. Like, they just like cannot stand each other. And then they sort of end up in this situation where they end up on a vacation where there is only one bed, and that's sort of like what starts their sort of any sort of relationship, like friendship or even just like talking to each other. That's sort of where it all stems from. And this one was pretty good. Like I said, not my all-time favorite series, but it does have this trope. Next is From the Jump by Lacie Waldon. This is a book about a girl who is very career focused. She sort of says yes to everything her office asks of her. She's a graphic designer, and anytime they ask her to do anything, she's like, yep, of course I can do that. Like, I'll take on all the extra work. Like, it's fine. Like, just let me do it all, because she wants to move up in the company. And she kind of realizes one day what she's actually doing. All her friends go on this trip every year to a new place, and she always turns them down because she's like, no, I have to stay at work. Like, I have to be, you know, always one-upping everybody. And so she never goes on these trips. She never really does anything for herself. She's always just working. And she is sitting in the office one day while her friends have gone on this trip to South Africa. And she's sitting there and she's kind of like, what am I doing? Like, why am I here? Why am I putting all my time into this? And she sort of realizes, like, hey, maybe this shouldn't be my top priority in life. And so she sort of walks out of work that day and then decides she's gonna fly to South Africa to join her friends there. And one of the friends that is on this trip is a guy that she's known for a while. And because she was like super last minute on the trip, there are, I think, actually a couple like only one bed type situations in this book. But this was a really cute one as well. I really enjoyed it. It's obviously got like a definite hint of like travel vibes again, which I really like. The authors of these books is actually a flight attendant, so I find her like travel books are really interesting. And so this is another good rec for this trope. Next is Home Game by Odette Stone, which is the second book in the Vancouver Wolves hockey series. I really have been enjoying this series, and this one is super, super sweet. It follows a guy who is a hockey player, obviously, and he's trying to sort his receipts in a coffee shop, like for his taxes, and he's not really understanding what to put in what category, and he's just getting super frustrated at the whole thing. And there's this girl that's sitting at the table behind him, and she kind of notices that he's really struggling with what he's doing. So she makes a comment to him, like, oh, you need to put that in this column. And he's like, oh, okay, thanks. Like, how'd you know that? And she's like, I took accounting in grade 10. He was like, oh, okay. Like, basically, like, wow, I could have learned this in grade 10. And so she ends up helping him with his, like, receipts in this coffee shop. And then she sort of panics, and she's like, oh my gosh, I'm late, I have to leave, like, I should have left a while ago. And she's like getting all her stuff and like getting ready to run out of this coffee shop, and he's like, hold on, I'll drive you, like, wherever you're going. And so she gets in his car, and he drives her to this intersection that she tells him to drive to, and he's watching her when she gets out of the car, and she like runs up to this homeless shelter, and they turn her away because it's after 8, which is like when they like close, like you have to be there before 8 or you don't get in. And she's late, and she ends up, like, she starts walking down the street, and he's kind of like, what the heck just happened? Like, she was obviously trying to get in that homeless shelter, and now she's walking away, like, what was that? And he like drives up beside her, and he's like, what just happened? And she like tells him, and he's like, oh, so like, where are you gonna go now? And she's like, oh, I was just gonna go sit in a 24-hour diner for the night, like, they don't really care if I sleep there and whatever. And he's like, oh no, like, you should just like come home with me, like, just for like the night, like, it'll be fine. And he brings her home, and I don't remember exactly where the only one bed thing came in this book, but it definitely had it because I just read this recently and added it to the list. But this one was so sweet. The guy in this one was just like genuinely wanted to help this girl, and she kept thinking like he had ulterior motives, and he's like, no, like, seriously, just stay here until you can get enough money to like get your own place, like, it's totally fine, like, don't worry about it. And it was just like a really sweet romance. I really enjoyed this one. And so those are all of the recs I have for you guys today. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below. I do new book videos every single week, and I will see you next time.